How clear is this guidance to you? Do you like the way it is structured?
I think
How do you
they're
feel
as
about
inclusive as they can be because, as with any of these organizations, and I'm sure others have commented on this, they have to go through such a rigorous regulatory process. I'm amazed that they came out in the shape that they're in. So I think they're pretty
Thorough. I mean, in terms of just the general attitude of the policy, it's not coming off as Big Brother, and it as I said, it's a pretty thorough policy.
I think the level of detail is absolutely perfect for a practical policy. You go any longer than this, and it gets messy and hard for people to comprehend. Anybody who's developed any marketing message knows that if you go too long, you lose people. And this is, I think, 7 rules for each category is sufficient to cover what needs to be said without becoming unmanageable.
As a first step, I think this is a terrific achievement, actually. As with anything which looks simple, clearly there was an awful lot of work which has gone on behind the scenes to produce these 2 sets of 7 guidelines for talking about Roche personally and talking about Roche professionally.
I think, they're pretty common sense guidelines that probably apply to the real world as well as the social media world, but with some special emphasis on the idea that, what you say locally can have a global, be spread globally.
I think it's an interesting paradox because in many ways, interestingly, I had a look at a social media policy issued by an NHS trust recently. And in some ways, you could argue that was much more clear because, well, for a start, 6 out of 7 of the points were started with "you should not." So, there was a clarity in that. But and in many ways, the guidance given by Roche is in some ways sort of vague. But it's more about identifying general philosophical principles about how you use these new media. And actually, I think that's much more useful than a set of you can and you can't rules that we're given.
One of the best parts about Roche's guidelines is that they're written in plain language. It's not a bunch of obtuse lawyer speak. They break it down into some very clear sections that anybody can read.
It's very clear. The different points, the 7 points and 7 points for personal or professional, rules, it's very clear. One thing that I think is kind of interesting is the encouragement to be scouts or eyes and ears, that if an employee hears something that's relevant, that they go ahead and report it to the company.
They also do mention adverse event reporting, but they do it in a very, I think, very reasonable way. They actually recognize the fact, and I'm going to quote something here from the guidelines, given the interactivity and speed of the new medium, it is not realistic for every interaction or comment to undergo full approval by the legal and regulatory departments. So I think that's quite reasonable, and I think that they've done a fantastic job of being quite clear about it.
Great feedback, everybody. What I'm hearing is Roche social media guidance is clear, common sense, and simple, whilst still being thorough enough to integrate the complexity of the social media environment. You also seem to be very mindful of the regulatory constraints that the pharmaceutical industry is facing, and thus very appreciated of the fact that Roche did take such a simple approach. It could have been much more complex. So overall, I'm hearing, good job, Roche. We understand your guidance, and we appreciate its simplicity.